Thank you. Good morning. Selamat pagi. It's great to be here, and thank you all panelists for taking time to join us today. So we don't have a lot of time, but this is a really important topic and lots to discuss. So I'd like to jump straight in and just to check if you can hear me okay.
That's very faint.
It's very faint. It's a bit faint. I'll try to speak up and see if that works. So as the energy demand grows in Southeast Asia because of economic growth, rising population, but we are now also balancing the commitment to climate net zero targets. The energy trilemma looks set to increase. It's going to be very difficult to balance power demand with security, affordability, and sustainability. So I'd like to open the discussion with a question to all of our panelists. How do you think ASEAN is faring in terms of addressing the energy trilemma? So Pak Darmawan, if we could start with you, please.
Well, first thing is the Earth is warming. And the future of the next generation might be compromised. So we need to reduce greenhouse gas emission. And I'm here to announce that PLN is the National Electric Company of Indonesia, is fully committed exactly to do so. But in the same time, the growth of economic is very rapid. The additional demand is also very high. How are we going to be able to balance between growth and sustainability? And let me share with you, in the past, when we're talking about cheap energy, it's dirty. But let me share with you also that humankind innovates. The price of renewable energy is going down because of innovation year by year, month by month, week by week, day by day. When I auctioned solar in 2015, it's 26 cents per kilowatt hour. When I auctioned wind in 2018, it was 12 cents per hour, per kilowatt hour. Today, solar is 5 cents, wind is only 5.5 cents. So today, when we're talking about clean energy, it's cheap. When we're talking about cheap energy, it's clean. Yes, there's a trilemma. Affordability, security, and sustainability. In the past, it's a multiple conflicting goals. But with this kind of humankind innovations, it's going to reach what we call the convergence. In that regard, I still believe that humankind always prevail with that kind of innovation. And this is the case with Indonesia. How are we going to walk the talk? 2 years ago, we already removed 13 gigawatt of coal in the planning phase. That's avoiding 1.8 billion metric tons of CO2 greenhouse gas emission in the span of 25 years. Is it enough? No, it's not enough. We remove 1.1 gigawatt of coal and replacing it directly with renewable energy running as a baseload. Is it enough? No, it's not enough. We devised the greenest national electricity planning in the history of Indonesia 2 years ago. The additional generation capacity, 51% is coming from renewable energy. Is it enough? No, it's not enough. We already launched a net zero emission by 2060. Where do we go from here today? Is it enough? No. We are in the process of devising, designing, redesign the national electricity planning. With the new one, we understand there is a mismatch between the large-scale sources of renewable energy located in those remote areas, scattered, mismatched with the epicenter of demand. We need to build the green enabling transmission line. In the past, when we're talking about the base load, is coming from coal, 5-6 cents per kilowatt hour. In the past, wind and solar is roughly 11-12 cents. So adding solar and wind at that time is actually to drive the cost up, increase the price of electricity. How about today? There is a new presidential regulations actually stipulating that we're not going to be able to design and build any more coal. So the baseload generation capacity, the new one is coming from gas-fired power plants. hydro and geothermal. When we auction it, it's roughly 9 until 11 cents per kilowatt hour. Price is going to increase. But today, wind and solar, when we auction it, it's only 5 until 6 cents per kilowatt hour. So in the past, adding solar and wind is going to increase the price. But today, adding solar and wind is going to reduce the cost of electricity. That's why we are in the process right now designing and building the smart grid with flexible generation, smart transmission, smart dispatch center, smart distribution, smart meter. With this kind of fashion in which we're treating this as a challenge, yes, but also we're treating this as an opportunity. How we're going to grow. With this new kind of a planning, we are able to add additional 32 gigawatt of renewable energy as a base load with this kind of a green enabling transmission line. With this newer smart grid, we are able to add previously only 5 gigawatt of variable renewable energy, solar and wind, to become 28 gigawatt of variable renewable energy. In that regard, I'm very optimistic here. Yes, the challenge is huge, but we have a conviction with this kind of a shifting from previously fragmented global communities to become unified with this kind of forum is giving us a sense of pride. No matter the challenge ahead, we're going to keep moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Darmawan. And I think you mentioned about infrastructure and the grid, and I'd like to come back to that. But Kathy, if we could move to you.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
No, I think, could we do a mic check for Kathy, please? Can you try again?
Good mics.
Do you want to try again?
Can you hear me okay?
No.
My mic is not on. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So we see there is strong commitment from the ASEAN governments to Hello? Yeah. Much better. Yeah, thank you. So we see very strong commitment from the ASEAN governments to make sure this energy transition, which is a very complex problem, to be achieved in a sustainable way through collaboration, through building up connectivity, and in an orderly and just way. So ASEAN, we see ASEAN has a huge role to play and has a bright future. We see this energy trilemma needs to be responded in a and strategy, which means at BP we're investing in what the world needs today in terms of energy system, which is still primarily hydrocarbons. At the same time, spend money, investments to build our energy transition for the future. And we need all of those, not just one single source of energy, because of the enormity of the challenges. And we believe strongly that natural gas, because of its features serving as base load, is a very effective bridging fuel. But natural gas development itself is not enough. We need to bring CCS, which is carbon storage and utilization, to enable sustainable natural gas development. And BP, both from a corporate company standpoint and in Indonesia, we're exactly doing that. And I'm happy to share a bit later.
And Ms. Enoh.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. And I'd just like to quickly thank the organizers, the government of Indonesia, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for gathering us all for these very important discussions. So from our perspective, and I should say very briefly, I represent the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, which is a U.S. government agency that's focused on supporting the development of high-quality infrastructure, and at the same time bringing solutions, technologies, innovations that the U.S. has to offer. So I say that by way of prefacing that everything almost that I will say today is coming from that very pragmatic point of view of preparing projects for implementation for financing, and for sustainability in the end. So from our perspective, ASEAN is really looking at how to address many of the challenges that we face in this transition in focusing on clean energy. ASEAN is focusing both on a collective level and also in individual countries as well. And in that focus, it is very much an understanding of what will it take in terms of preparing projects that can actually be implemented. For the benefit of the region, for example, we are looking at regional sort of interconnectedness projects. And that's very important to focus on the how, the details. Similarly, with electric vehicles, which we hear a lot of, what does that actually mean? What are the policies? What are the recommendations that would be necessary to actually do this? So ASEAN is looking proactively at grappling with some of these very challenging issues. And I think that kind of direction is going to be critical if there's going to be success in facing the challenges. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. And Goldie?
Your question, Caroline, was how is ASEAN doing? And I suppose I could play to the audience and say you're doing a great job. You're doing all right. You've got the good intentions, great ideas, you're bringing down costs, and you're investing. I could lose the audience by saying, nah, you're doing okay, but really not that great, because you continue to use a lot of coal in this region. Or I could say to you that, in fact, it doesn't matter. And you might be surprised. And I say that because carbon emissions, much like COVID, pay no respect to regions, pay no respect to borders, don't clear customs and immigration. They move around. So even if you were doing great, it doesn't matter, because we all need to do great. That's the first point I think we all have to recognize is we're truly in this together. And that means you have to be honest about the facts. And for too long, we have allowed the facts to get away from our narrative. So if it's already going to be, and believe me, this transition, first of all, it's a transition. Secondly, it's going to be really, really hard. There's nothing easy about this. It's going to be a mess. It's not a straight line. No matter the best of intentions, the best of will, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be very complicated. But you know what will make it more complicated? Is if we set aside the facts. And for too long, we've allowed sort of the louder voices, if you will, to set aside the facts. First fact, we're still going to need traditional fossil fuels. At least for the next 30 to 40 years, according to the OECD, you know those cars that we're taking off the roads to get you an electrical vehicle? We're not having a funeral for them and sticking them 6 feet underground. They're being sent somewhere else in the world to be used. They're still going to need gasoline. They're still going to need sources of energy that are traditional. We have to do a significantly better job in promoting the fact that we are not going to achieve net zero without nuclear. For too long, environmentalists, with all due respect, have said, we're going to do net zero without nuclear. Now, many of them have come to the realization that, in fact, nuclear, particularly the innovation that's being led in Canada, small modular nuclear reactors, are going to be a critical piece of helping organize our countries and businesses and society to reach their net zero targets. We're going to rely heavily on carbon capture, something else that environmentalists in particular have said, we don't need to do that. It encourages the creation of carbon. We are going to create carbon. We're breathing, we're alive, we move, we do things. Of course carbon's going to be created. We're going to have to capture it, and we're going to have to store it somewhere. We're going to have to figure out about something as complicated as hydrogen. We're all excited about green hydrogen, but it's going to take a lot of water. It's going to take a lot of electricity. It's going to take a lot of infrastructure. And so these are hard truths that I think we all have to come to grips with. And I'll stop there, but I just want to make sure that when we talk about the trilemma, we remember that a trilemma is supposed to be effectively 3 equal solutions to a complex problem. And I'd like to get into the discussion where I believe they're not equal, and that in fact the most important one amongst those 3 of energy security, sustainability, and affordability is the last one. because we're only going to be able to move as far and as fast as our societies allow us to do. See Germany. Went too fast, too soon on renewables, and now they're running coal plants and had to go back to gas because the society couldn't afford the transition. So we have to be very conscious of the best of intentions here, can be pulled back very quickly in a society, irrespective of your form of government. We serve the people.
Right, thank you. And I'd like to come back to you. Goldie, you mentioned that we'll need a lot of infrastructure. Pak Darmawan, you mentioned earlier that the conflict among the three aspects of energy trilemma may actually be easing. So, for example, affordability and sustainability don't have to be mutually exclusive today. And Enoh, so I'd like to get your views on that. Is it now possible to balance the energy trilemma? And given that we will need so much new infrastructure to get there, like, how do you see the role of USTDA in this?
Thank you for that. And I will admit, in a previous life, I was an attorney. And so I often answered questions about, is it possible with, it depends. But I actually want to go out on a limb today and say, yes, it is possible to balance it, and that view is formed by what I do now in the context of project preparation for infrastructure projects. Because I believe if you keep certain elements in mind, that you can approach the infrastructure of the future that is going to absolutely be addressing the challenges of transition and more, that you can do it in a balanced way. So a couple of the elements that I would call to mind. Number one, I think we are all in this mindset of creating partnerships, and partnerships that are real, partnerships that look to cross the cross-section of what it needs to stand up infrastructure, whether it is technology providers, whether it is financiers, whether it is project preparers. This all has to be done in the mind of we have to do this in a way that works, taking various elements into mind. Policy and regulations are really critical in that as well. I would say that we also have to be willing to invest in innovative technologies. On the one hand, being willing to risk and test sort of completely new technologies is huge. On the other hand, you have to be willing to apply already existing technologies in an innovative way. I think that will get us a long way towards this balancing. Number three, I think you have to think about, and I almost use these interchangeably, access, i.e. affordability, from the beginning. When you're planning projects, think about who it is and how it is that women, that people in underserved communities, how is this going to impact them? And if you're thinking about that in the beginning, you're going to build something that is accessible and therefore affordable as well. I would say that you have to prioritize project preparation, obviously. I would say that, but it's actually critical to be able to get the financing that you need to be able to stand up these projects and to make sure that they're technically designed well. And then finally, I would say look at the ecosystem of what you're trying to accomplish. I'm going to pick out one subject in particular that doesn't seem that related to project preparation, but you need to keep in mind, and that is procurement, procurement of infrastructure. It is, it can make or break. And so thinking about how you procure, and in our view at USTDA, you do it in a way that takes into account the life cycle, that takes into account the value, and we've taken the time to educate procurement officials around the world on this subject. So those are the elements that I see, and because of that, I do think that you can approach this in a balanced way. You just have to think early, and you have to take into account the entire ecosystem of what will be necessary to accomplish your goals.
Thank you, and I think that's a great view. So it's a lot about preparation and embracing the newer technologies that could come in, but preparing the landscape for it now. So Kathy, if we could come to you, you mentioned a few technologies earlier that some may consider a little bit nascent and not yet at a commercial level that can be scaled up and deployed very widely, such as CCS. Could you share some of the, share more on some of these specific projects you're working on, how close, how far we are from commercially deploying these technologies?
So yeah, so I think first of all, to fix this problem of scale that we're facing in the world, we definitely need critical technology, new technology development, and new technology application. So in this space, collaboration between government, industry, and academia is a huge enabler. And the process we need to go through is to innovate, to come up with new ideas, to test them, to make them effective, that they do what they're supposed to do, reduce the cost, and to find actual applications where we can scale them up to achieve the massive effect, if you will. And it's not purely from a lab setting. A lot of these new technology applications are born from the practices the industry has been doing for decades. So one example, BP is investing significant amount of money in our Tangguh LNG. It's already the largest gas field in country, and we're building the CCUS capability to this. When the CO2 comes out of reservoir, we re-inject back, but that's only the foundational level. And there are a couple of new applications of this CO2 re-injection. Number one is we're using that to engage in enhanced gas recovery, and that application on an existing technology is the first in the world. I think secondly is the reservoir themselves are huge. In Tangguh, we have reservoir capacity of up to 1.8 gigatons. So from that standpoint, we would have the capacity to attract, to store CO2, not just from our Tangguh, our field, but from domestic emission sources and also international sources. We talked about infrastructure. Of course, there's physical infrastructure. I think there's also a policy, regulatory infrastructure that is hugely important. And over the last year, Indonesia government has been moving at a very fast pace to establish, to build the regulatory framework through the regulations and to enable the CCS, CCUS industry. The policy and the regulatory infrastructure is hugely enabling. And from BP's standpoint, we're very supportive, and we applaud the Indonesia government's leadership in this space and the collaboration with the industry.
Thank you, Kathy. And Pak Darmawan, if I can come to you. So if we think now about the energy transition in the power sector, and as you mentioned earlier, the grid, we can't run away from the discussion around the grid, digitalizing it, smart grid, but also extending the grid out so that it could accommodate all the renewables that we hope to build. So be it the domestic grid here in Indonesia or the ASEAN power grid that has been widely discussed, could you share with us some of the challenges and perhaps what are the collaboration opportunities that people can work with you and together to help push that and drive that implementation sooner?
First, I want to say thank you to British Petroleum. Actually, we are the biggest customer, the anchor buyer of British Petroleum in Indonesia. And can you imagine this? And we are entering a critical phase of transition of energy. Why I'm calling it critical? Because it offers huge, tremendous challenges, but also magnificent opportunities. Challenges. We're talking about, when we're talking about gas-fired power plants, 1 gigawatt is only $500 million US. Hydro, 1 gigawatt is roughly $2 billion US. Geothermal, 1 gigawatt is $2.7 billion US. capex investment, meaning that the investment is quadruple, meaning that's increasing huge amount of debt. But in the same time, also the operational cost, operational expenditure, the fuel cost of renewable energy is very low. So it's when we're talking about renewable energy as a base load, it's a front-loaded investment. The levelized cost of electricity is going to be roughly the same, but it's going to be amortized in the next 25 years. So the biggest challenge of the transition of energy is how we're going to be able to deploy large amount of capital. And of course, this kind of forum, you know, the ASEAN-Indo-Pacific Forum is giving us a sense of pride. Previously, fragmented global communities today becoming unified. With that kind of fighting spirit, we are very sure no matter the challenge ahead, we're going to be able to move forward, you know. We're talking about collaboration of policy, collaboration of technology, collaboration of innovations, collaboration of co-investments. This is local, national, regional, and also international. And, you know, about the Asian power grid. You know, during the COVID-19, and we can see that the Asian regions has been enjoying a very strong resilience. Why? Because of collaborations. But when we're talking about the networks of energy, I think we are kind of left behind. We need to work on it. When we're talking about interconnected grid, it's actually offering secure, robust, sustainable supply of energy. But today, even in Indonesia, Sumatra and Java, the transmission is not connected. Kalimantan to Java is not connected. So that's why we are facing, like I presented before, a mismatch between the sources of large-scale base-load renewable energy, hydro and geothermal, in those remote areas with the location of epicentrum demand on the other part of the region in Java. So we need to build the green enabling transmission line. And the dream of the Asian power grid is actually reflecting the dream of how we're going to be able to grow together, providing robust supply of energy, much more reliable energy, but this also facing a lot of complexities. We have to navigate the complexities of the technical difficulties of building transmission line, the cross-border transmission line from Laos to Vietnam to Cambodia, to Malaysia, to Singapore, to Indonesia, the whole area. We have to navigate the complexities of how aligning some kind of different policies, how we're going to be able to come up with some kind of a commercial feasibilities. This is requiring large amount of investment. So we have to come up with a term in which there is a way to recover the investment back. How about we going to be able to map out every single risk, and each of the risks has to be addressed properly. And then the internal rate of return is going to be commercially feasible. And then also we're talking about legal complexity. So, but you know, like with this kind of forum, we understand the ASEAN power grid is not only about towers, it's not only about wires, it's not only about substations, but it's representing a new strength of ASEAN, reflecting the shift of previously fragmented ASEAN to become unified for one purpose of all, prosperity for the Asian region. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, Enoh, if I can come back to you, Pak Darmawan has mentioned, I mean, some of the challenges like technical and harmonization of policies, if you're looking at interconnected grids around the region, will require a whole other discussion that we perhaps don't have the time for today. But I hope to at least address maybe some of the other challenges mentioned, like capital, how do we de-risk the projects? And USTDA has a lot of experience in that. Could you just perhaps share what are some of the factors that would make you comfortable to enter and invest in some of these infrastructure assets that's needed to push the energy transition?
Absolutely. I think it's such a critical question. And again, from our perspective as being engaged in that early stage of preparing projects, obviously bringing down, limiting the risk to potential investors. And because we are providing assistance through grant-based funding for technical assistance, feasibility studies, pilot projects, the kinds of things that are going to give that assurance to investors. It is very important for us to have our ducks in a row as to the criteria, the factors that will enable us to invest. And perhaps I'll answer the question by example, which is the fact that we have supported here in Indonesia the feasibility, looking at the technical assistance for setting up this first small modular reactor here. So this is looking at advanced nuclear, to Goldie's point earlier, technology, which, you know, doesn't yet exist, but has gone a long way in terms of research and development. And so for an agency that, again, using taxpayer funds, but embracing the fact that we do have to take considered risk, then, how do we do that? So first, of course, is understanding the research, the analysis, what has gone into the product so far. For us, we're fortunate to have experts in our Department of Energy, in our Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So we are able to build on that expertise. We're able to understand the partners that we have who are knowledgeable in the field, who are in communication with our regulatory counterparts. That is important because the regulatory environment has to be developed at pace. And when a new technology, how do you do that? Well, you do that by engaging and sharing information and sharing knowledge. So that piece is something we very much look to in terms of the prospects for success. I would also say that it's important that we see a willingness, even if the sector isn't known, to build on knowledge that does exist, for the regulators to have an inclination to give us a sense that, okay, this will work. I have to, and I can't underscore enough, the technical acumen that we rely on. And this comes from the private sector. In this case, our partner here with the small modular reactor that we're looking at in West Kalimantan is Indonesia Power. They have selected a US firm, NewScale, to look at this possibility. But there's a range of partners here. There's a subsidiary from Texas-based Fluor, and there's a Japanese corporation, JGC. So it's a whole constellation of technical experts. It's critical to making sure that we're doing this in the right way. The last piece I will talk about is communication. And it begins early, and it's not just on the technical sense, it's not just capacity building in the technical part, but also with your population, with your communities, to really be able to explain what it is you're thinking about, what it is you're planning, and how and what the risks and impacts are.
Thank you. And Goldie, if I can come to you, you mentioned right at the start that we are all in this together, right? And I think one advantage of perhaps the ASEAN region is to be able to look at the best practices of what has happened in other countries and to be able to leapfrog the energy transition here. So could you share with us, what are some of the ways and initiatives in Canada that have helped to promote sustainable alternatives that also help to balance the energy trilemma that perhaps we could adopt here in the region?
Carbon tax. You want to incent the behavior you want. I mean, there's not many countries that have taken that approach, but a carbon tax is the most market-sensitive way to start changing behavior. The United States doesn't have it. Many other countries don't have it. It's going to be complicated as we start talking about carbon border adjustments and so forth. The communication, the education, the responsibility that governments and businesses and others have to bring the public with us, I think, is an important component of it. Look, this issue is the issue of our time. It is wrought with challenges, but it also creates opportunities. And there's no question that there are many of those. And I'm very proud as a Canadian that our government and the ASEAN governments have now brought in Canada as a strategic partner to the ASEAN. And I think it's a good moment where we can both benefit from what each of us can bring to the table. There's a lot of synergies here. We have what you need, you have what we need. We both have really smart people. We're both going to be much more aggressive and innovative in terms of dealing with the issues, but we have to be, again, back to my point about being honest about where we find ourselves. There are some systemic issues that we're going to deal with. One, if you ask me what's keeping many CEOs, not just in Canada, but many CEOs I interact with around the world up at night, the answer might surprise you. The answer is the decline of democracy. That it's becoming very difficult for capital to be deployed and form and achieve the purpose of deploying that in democracies. Now, I know in the ASEAN there are different forms of governments, but you know what? All democracies aren't the same, all communists aren't the same, all autocrats aren't the same, but capital is frankly neutral when it comes to an ideology. Capital is neutral when it comes to a nationality. Capital has an anthem. How do I make $1 too? I will go wherever it is to make $1 too. And if we're not careful, we're actually going to embolden some of the very societies that we're competing against. And so what do we need from those democracies? But not just democracies, all forms of government as businesses, because with all due respect, governments are only going to be able to spend so much. It's going to be largely, if not almost all of it, private sector led. Governments can enable, they can create incentives. Just for context, the IRA is about $300-400 billion, maybe $500 billion. It's estimated that all of today's global GDP, which is in the $135 trillion range, is going to be necessary to get to net zero by 2050. There's no way governments can pay for all of that. So they have to create the incentives for businesses to be able to lead on this transition. So what's holding us back? Number one, I would say to you, is policy certainty. We need policy predictability, permitting stability, permitting reform, where we know that if you follow the rules, it doesn't matter who's in power, because with all due respect, governments come and governments go. But businesses have to make investments for the long haul. Otherwise, we get stranded assets. We're going to be seeing a lot of that today. Right? We're being forced to strand our assets to develop new technology. But someone has to pay for all of that. And so policy predictability, policy certainty is a very, very big part of that. The second issue here is what we've discussed is about infrastructure. This is not sexy stuff, but you know what? If you're going to capture carbon, you're going to have to put it into a pipe. You're going to have to build that pipe to be able to store it in certain demographies and geographies that you can't just store it wherever. You have to have certain conditions to do that. And so if people get in the way of the development of the infrastructure, then they're actually getting in the way of reducing emissions. And so we've got to connect infrastructure development to the achievement of our emissions goals. For now, it's seen as unnecessary. We don't need more infrastructure. The fact is, we need a lot more infrastructure. Third of 4 points. The third one is simply this. If you ask most people who have said they've made their 2050 commitments, so they're going to get to net zero, if they're honest with you, they will tell you they don't know how. They will tell you that we figured out how to do 30%, maybe 40%, maybe 50%. Sure, there's some exceptions who figured out how to do it, okay? But the vast majority of them are banking on innovation to happen. We don't really know exactly how we're going to get there from here to there. And innovation requires patience. Most innovation is successful after failing. So we're going to do some things, we're going to fail, we're going to figure out how to do it better, and we're going to keep working at it. And that's where I think collaboration with ASEAN, with other regions in the world, is going to be so central to what we do. And then the fourth component of this, and I just want to repeat it one more time, because if there's a significant risk out there that will get in the way of the progress that we are trying to make and need to make on climate change, on reducing emissions, it is if we lose our publics. If we cannot bring society with us on the journey that we're going, they will slingshot you back into reality. I mean, it's very difficult in your country, the United States, where black becomes white or red becomes blue on day one of a new administration. An executive order can cancel a pipeline. An executive order can remove a carbon tax. An executive order can do all kinds of things. That will not be conducive to capital forming in your country, so you're incenting your way there, but how much of that can you really do in the long run? Right? And so we have to make sure that we're bringing our public with us on this journey and building the infrastructure that they need, particularly electricity grids, particularly cheaper energy such as small modular nuclear reactors, particularly hydrogen and other things which are not easy to do. They're complicated. And so we have to have a truth conversation with our society. Otherwise, we're talking amongst the elites here, we're talking amongst ourselves, and we will be reminded, as smart as we may all be, the public will decide how far we can go and how fast we can go.
Thank you. And I think we've been talking about the energy transition trilemma as to what's needed in terms of infrastructure as a necessary journey. But an emerging dimension of the energy transition is also about retaining or even enhancing country competitiveness, industrial competitiveness. So Kathy, if you could share with us briefly and quickly, how do you see these aspects now shaping businesses' decisions, countries' decisions about energy mix or investment decisions?
Yeah. So I think in terms of increasing countries' competitiveness is not a new topic. And of course, the agenda in terms of energy transition, because of the magnitude where the amount of investments are needed, Bloomberg talked about 7 trillion per year being needed for us, for the world, to reach net zero between now and 2050, the need for technology, the need for collaboration, that puts the country competitiveness in the new light. On one hand, we do need to collaborate. At the same time, each country really presents the ability to attract capital. I think from an industry participant standpoint, we look at several factors, if you will. First is really the demand that drives a lot of potential, the supply potential, and the technology needed, how mature, would we be able to decrease the cost and increase the reliability so it's scalable. And the infrastructure that I talked about, not just the physical infrastructure, but also the policy infrastructure. And to compete for investments globally, BP has a global portfolio. All of the projects need to meet the hurdle rate. And we look at those factors, the supply, the demand, the infrastructure, the technology, and how stable it is that our projects would be able to survive and be successful for many years because of the long cycle of these projects. I think also innovation and how a country government is welcoming the new development. BP is exploring low carbon energy opportunities within ASEAN, and Indonesia is very gifted with a lot of geothermal, solar, all sources of new energy, and how can we forge new relationships to make our projects economic, establish the commerciality as the first step, and gradually, steadily scale up so then they can be sustainable over the long term. And we cannot do it alone. That's why collaborating with our national partners, with other IOCs, is critical factor to success.
Thank you. And I think the keywords that we've been hearing a lot is collaboration, preparation, and investing in infrastructure to get us there. We only have a couple of minutes left on the clock, so I'd like to shoot a fire round question to all the panelists to close this out. Can Indonesia achieve net zero emissions by 2060 while maintaining global economic competitiveness? Goldie?
Yes is the answer, but we've all discussed how, and that's the hard part here, is we need the leadership, we need the will, we need the capital, we need the innovative capacity to do so.
Enoh?
I would also say yes, but let's not let the moment that we are in pass us by. We have reached a level of awareness that I don't think can be peeled back in terms of the importance of these issues, in terms of the collectiveness in which we are talking about these issues. And I think that that cannot be underestimated, but it's incumbent on all of us from our perspectives, including where we have the ability to facilitate and bring together parties that can act here, to act, to keep moving the ball forward, even within the vicissitudes of political change, because we have come quite far in a short time, and we have to make sure that we continue forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy?
So I would say definitely visa. I think from our standpoint, Indonesia is a very important country in our global portfolio. We've been here for more than 50 years, and we would like to contribute to the long-term sustainable energy security and energy transition agenda the country has. Going back to what I said earlier, the end is very, very important. These things do not happen overnight and full of challenges. So we need to invest in the energy systems the world needs today. We also need to start investing in innovating for what the world will need tomorrow. So we need all of them. And I also wanted to say that each country, each region, the economic circumstances are different. The path to transition is different. And we need to look into the actual situation, the need to figure out the how. That's really the challenging piece. But BP is very committed to supporting ASEAN community, supporting Indonesia to reach our goals.
Thank you. And Pak Darmawan?
Yes, we need to make sure that the future of the next generation should be better than ours. And we are fully committed exactly to do so. And we're doing this not only because of international environmental agreement, not only because of policy, we do this because we really care. How are we going to walk the talk? I think yes, we can. We're going to be able to achieve net zero emission by 2060. But we need to get the right policy, regulatory framework in place. We need to design an ecosystem that is conducive for green investment. We need to come up with some kind of collaboration of policy, technology, innovations, co-investment in every single sense. We're not going to be able to bear the burden alone. And PLN here, we're giving the best we can. And in the past, our main job was to provide electricity. But in the future, our main job is to take care of the environment while electricity is our byproduct. Thank you.
Thank you. And I love the sense of optimism, right? And I think we all acknowledge that there's still a lot of work to be done, but let us also look back at the past few years, and we have seen that the momentum has remained so strong for Indonesia, for PLN, and let us, let that encourage us to continue exploring the collaboration partnerships that we need to move even further on. So thank you. Please join me in thanking my panelists today.
Thank you very much to Ms. Caroline Chua and also to our distinguished speakers for the last panel discussion for our sub-theme 1.